Hello, fellow watercolor enthusiasts. Tim here. Welcome you to an edited recording of one of my exclusive live demos for my lovely Patreon members. It's one of our monthly projects where we dive into the world of watercolor and create masterpieces together. We tackle loads of various subjects like street scenes, landscapes, seascapes, and really some quite challenging ones as well, as this one is. In this demo, I'll be going through my particular process as I paint this magnificent Valetta Harbour in Malta. The focus here is twofold. It's on simplification. Look at all those boats in there, that busy, very busy middle ground scene. How would you tackle that in watercolour? How would you simplify that scene? And secondly, how to get a sense of depth in your scene as well. That feeling of the distance and the succession of different objects and shapes going through into the background. So I'm going to take you through the entire painting process, from start to finish, ensuring that you don't miss a single stroke. And if you're curious about Patreon, you don't know what it's about, then please check out my site, patreon.com/Tim Wilmot, for more information. Love to have you on board. There's loads of things going on, honestly, so you need to check it out. So let's go into it as I introduce the scene to my members, and let's make some waves with this watercolour in this busy harbour scene. Right, well, I think the objective of this demo is twofold. Firstly, and we covered this on Pat Chat the other night, firstly, simplification. Look in that middle ground. There must be hundreds of boats there. It's going to be a real exercise in trying to simplify everything down to objects, down to shapes, really. And the second theme will be how to get depth into a scene like this. We've got a two-dimensional photograph. How do we get the sense of depth in here? And again, on Pat Chat, we covered a few ideas about a few solutions about how we would get depth into this scene with the background. Incidentally, this is the Grand Harbour. Thanks very much, Mike, for your posting to, hopefully you all saw that on the community tab, the exact location, and Mike gave us a map of where he took the photograph from. So this is the Grand Harbour in Valetta, Malta, in the middle of the Mediterranean. So sense of depth, the background buildings. I think this is generally a sort of U shape of a harbour here. And at the back there, those buildings, we've got to push those back, okay? Next, how can we achieve depth in this painting? Well, those masts. Look at the nearest masts, they're going to be higher. The masts that are further away, they're lower, but they're kind of sort of, the base of them is similar level. It's just how high do they go up? Shorter ones at the back there. Thirdly, look at that cloud formation, lovely clouds. Again, they're almost like sort of a perspective in a way, guiding us into the scene. Do you see? It's quite a nice, Mike took this just at the right time with that cloud formation. Another way of bringing in that depth there. And fourthly, possibly the quayside here on the right hand side, which I think is a nice element to retain to sort of frame that right hand side, give it some context. We don't just have all these boats jutting out there and kind of nothing on the right hand side. We've got that framing on that right hand side, and that sort of leads us in with a perspective of the edge of the harbour side, leading us up that right hand side, and I guess it would just progress on round the harbour that side. Let me describe my materials to you before we start. So paper-wise, always recommend good quality paper. I'm using Saunders Waterford, cold press 300 grams, 15 inches by 11 inches. Paints are from Mark Jackman's Professional Quality Paints. There are lots of other good brands available too. I've got my normal palette, neutral tint, burnt umber, burnt sienna, yellow ochre, spring green. Probably won't be using that today. Radiant green, cobalt green, cerulean blue, cobalt blue, ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, cadmium red, light red, cadmium orange, and cadmium yellow, a bit contaminated with something. A few odd colours down there, a couple of mixing wells. Brushes wise, I reckon I'm going to be starting off with a mop brush. This is a Da Vinci Casagno, size 4. Then for more detail work, more intricate work, a couple of rounded synthetic brushes, and of course, good old rigger for doing those fine lines, mask, rigging, and so on. The plan here, get the drawing right. Think about shapes. So the shape of the background buildings, the shape of the middle ground boats, the shape of these three, mainly these three foreground boats, 1, 2, 3. Probably try and bring that left one in just a wee bit. Draw in these rather nice buoys here, another, and the fenders as well. And another nice sort of nautical theme gives it a bit more context as well. Figure, we've got a figure over here, too far on the right for my liking. I'm going to have that figure in there. Not sure about this. Mike, what are they called? You know, they put their wind their ropes around it to stop the boats going away. I'm sure someone will come back in chat and tell me what that is. Get the cloud shapes right. I might actually just draw in the clouds very lightly just to make sure I'm planning them out right. Normally, I don't do drawing in of cloud shapes. I just sort of guess. I just make up clouds basically. But here, I'm going to be a little bit more precise with them. So try and get that perspective coming into that background. Right, so that is the plan. Okay, so let's get started. Good luck everyone that's painting along with me. Just check and see if there's any questions. First of all, doesn't seem to be. Just hang on a second. Right, where to start drawing? Well, I think the composition is about right. I was thinking about moving the horizon up just a little bit. I don't want to go up too high because I need those clouds in there to give me that sense of depth. All right, so it's probably about right. I'll start on the left-hand side and get in the main shape of the buildings. Just an indication here of the skyline, and we've got a bit of an angle from the left hand side going down to, I guess, the end of the harbour, and then it sort of levels out. Not a perfectly straight line to the tops of the buildings in the background. And then over to the right, they almost start to rise again. The angle gets a little bit more away from that horizontal section there. Right, the tops of the boats. So I'm now down to here, trying to draw that line there. This is where you might want to look closely as you're drawing this. Look closely where the outline, where the edge goes up a little bit, then it dips down a little bit, dips down a bit there. And then we've got, gosh, we've got loads of rises and declines as we go in the back. We're following that line of the tops of the boats. I think I'm around about here. honestly, you can probably go quite abstract with these shapes. But now and again, just do a sort of square type, rectangular type shape, which could be the top of a cabin or something. It's quite a light cabin there. And again, it does rise up slightly to the right, down then to the edge of the harbour, I guess, down there. Next, I'm going to draw in this little jetty here. All right, and there's a sort of walkway leading from the quayside down to it. I'm not going to bother with that one, just this main jetty here. Okay, and then I'm going to draw in the shapes of the water to sort of fill in those gaps. Bit of a dark boat there, darker area there. All right, just fill in those shapes. I think with this sort of scene, you've got to think about the shapes of either the lighter areas, the lighter things, and or the shapes of the darker areas. So just think about light or dark, all right, and try and get those shapes right. Right, the jetty is angling down a little bit. Use a ruler if you want to. I'm just going to draw it freehand. Again, it can be a broken line like that. Be a broken line if you can't draw perfectly. Perfectly straight line. Now this jetty is not too wide with perspective. It's quite narrow. Certainly a bit narrow over to the left, widens a little bit as it comes down. Next, boats. These 3 foreground boats. So we'll have one. So it's going to obscure that jetty a little bit. Actually, that one needs to come down a bit more. That's the top of the jetty. Actually, my jetty can be a bit higher. Let's rub out that line. Right, that's the near side of the jetty. Let's make it a bit higher. Give me more space for the boats then. And their reflections. All right, that boat can go in where it was. Let's give it a bit of a cabin. One boat. Now the other 2 boats, and they're very different, these boats. That one's going to, out of the 2, that's probably the more difficult one to do, because that fancy bow of the boat and this curve of the gunnels there. Placement wise, so we've got one there. Thinking about the balance of the composition, let's get the middle boat a little bit left of center, so around about there. And the cabin is like that. And the waterline. Like that. And then boat number 3 on the right. Small but tricky, this one. Let's get the top of the cabin right first of all. And then the gunnels. It really is a fancy boat, this one. The the bow is pretty much vertical. That's going to make it a little bit easier. And then the waterline up like that. Right, fenders. There's one in there, one in there. There's a couple in a boat just there. The buoys on the water. Now we can move these around just to suit the composition a bit. So let's have one there, reflection of that. Let's do a couple in here. So a bigger one here, and then maybe a smaller one right about there. And then this one is attached to a smaller one as well. Let's get in the edge of the reflections. And the reflection of the left-hand boat. Like that. Good. Let me just strengthen the edge of the jetty here. Make sure I've got that angle right. Is it a bit too steep? I think it looks all right. So strengthen up that line. And then the near side. There we go. Right hand side, key side. About that sort of angle. Think about perspective. The edge of these sort of slabs, these stones here on the very edge. Look how thick it is, how wide it is there compared to just a sort of few meters further on. There's a walkway here and some rails there. Let's have my figure. So imagining our figure that was too far over the right, let's imagine him or her about to walk onto this gangway, this sort of go. I should have said the light. Where's the light coming from? I imagine it to be top left. I hope you agree. Somewhere up there. Okay, so I'm not sure whether it was taken. Maybe this was taken in the evening. I think we're looking west that way. Right, figure. Now these shapes between here and the middle ground boats, we've got to fill in the shapes of these darker areas, and starting with on the left hand side just beyond this jetty. Now I'm going to ignore some of these boats here. So that's going to be dark. That's going to be dark in there. Might not bother doing those fenders. We've got some sterns of boats being visible here. Another one there. And then we've got, so that's all dark. I'm using this cross hatching just as a reference to tell me where the darkness is. And then on this side, that's dark as well. Take this jetty over a little bit. Now, the middle ground. I'm not really going to do much to that. The way I'm going to handle that middle ground, I'm getting the overall shape of this mass of boats from the far top edge to the near bottom edge, just treating it as one object. And then my plan is with one of my smaller brushes, just put in different values in there, different shapes and values, mid-greys, darks, just to really try and give the impression of those boats. And putting in the mast, that's gonna help tell the viewer that there's a mass of boats going on there. Honestly, to draw things in here, there are canopies and bits of the mast, horizontal booms, I'm not sure what they're called, but where the sailings are mapped around. I don't want to draw that in because it will look too cluttered, and that some of that pencil marks are going to show through. Let's try and keep that quite light at this stage. Just a bit more details with the buildings before I start painting. And these lighter areas, again, think of shapes. There's sort of geometric shape, like a step pattern going down there, down there, down there, down there, down there. All right, the repetition of those lighter areas. And so that's a light area there. Bit dark, 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 so light. Moving further on down the scene, we've got a little light area there, and then another light area in there, as we go down, they get smaller, these light areas. There was a bit of light catching the tops of the buildings there. And a few little lighter patches, but the main light is here. The darkest area is in there. That's quite dark in there. Light, dark. I think that's about it for the drawing. I think if I do any more drawing, I'm going to go tight on myself, and I want to try and keep things fairly loose. I hope that's okay with everyone as my initial drawing there. Are there any questions? All right. Sky. We've got soft edges around those clouds. The colour of the sky is darker nearer to us, lighter on the horizon. And I think that's a warmer blue. Could be more of a darker, more of a sort of ultramarine type blue, being a slightly sort of warmish shade of blue. And this will be cooler, more like a cerulean blue, or almost a bit of green in there as well, just to push it back, a cool green. But that's my thought there. A few little soft, darker bits as well. So I'm going to wet the top portion of my sky. Oh, it's going to draw in those clouds, isn't it? A little light, just a little light edge for those clouds, just to give me some reference for those. So there's one in there. Not sure this is going to help me or not. There is this main one in there, and then some over on that right hand side, and then very sort of thin, very thin darkish clouds going into the distance. Right, wet the top portion of my painting down to the tops of the buildings. I'm just using a flat brush here, a little flat brush, and could use a sponge, but just apply an even layer over that top. Let it soak in. And then as this is damp, not super moist, but as it's damp, I will then, oops, I'm losing a few hairs from that brush. As it's just drying a little bit, I'll put in the darker clouds. This is shedding more hairs than my cat. I think it's on its last days, this brush. Gently down to that edge of the roofs. Now I've got a slight slope on my board, so the water is accumulating a little bit on the horizon. So try and move it against gravity. Let's make sure that gets a good soaking. And you can see it's shiny, can't you? So when that shine begins to go, that will be the time to start painting. Don't think you're going to be seeing this brush anymore. Okay, I think that's enough water actually. Let's just make sure I've got an even application now. So if you're in a dryish atmosphere, it's going to dry quicker for you. I think me in the UK right at the moment, it's probably about 50% relative humidity. So it might take a minute or two for it to just settle in there and get to that kind of dampish phase where you can probably see it's glistening a little bit less now. Could speed up the process if I just take the moisture out of this brush and just go over it again. It actually doesn't matter if you miss out covering this with water in some spaces, but you might get a little hard edge there, which might be quite attractive for the clouds. Right, mop brush with a good point. And let's mix up, let's take this stuff from my palette. This is something from my previous painting. Well, I guess it's sort of warmish grey. Let's put a bit of burnt sienna in there. Warmish grey, and starting from the edge to see how that behaves itself. I'm cleaning my palette here at the same time. So these clouds, just a little bit of darkness to them. Bit of ultramarine blue, bit of burnt sienna. Just gently tapping the surface, then let the paint do what it's going to do. Now, as I'm going to the horizon, just some thinner lines. Like that. Now the paper is drying a little bit, so now I'm going to fill in with the blue sky. As I say, warmer, darker blue nearer to us, and then a lighter blue towards the horizon. So a little bit of ultramarine blue. Could put a tiny bit of Aladdin Crimson in that just to warm it up a bit. And this is going to be thicker in consistency. This is going to be thicker than that darker cloud mix I had earlier. So I guess I'm going to be using this mixture down to about that kind of level, then get cooler with my blue. And don't overwork your sky, just ideally apply the paint once and then just leave it. All right, let's get into a lighter blue now. Cerulean. Let's get rid of this and mix a little bit of cerulean. Carefully paint around that tower. So I need to go a little bit lighter towards the horizon, so a bit more water to the mix. There we are. Hopefully a little bit trying to draw you in there to the scene. Just want to apply a little bit more darkness to that middle cloud there. There we go. Not do any more. Right. I'll just wait till that dries a little bit on the horizon there, because my next step are the buildings, and I will leave these lighter areas white for now. I might glaze over them, make them a little bit darker if I think they're too bright, but essentially I'm going to be painting in now in one go all of these buildings, okay? But thinking about depth again, getting cooler, lighter in value with the background buildings. I'm not going to be painting around some of these mast shapes here. I will use some of these masts are light, some of them are dark. I'm not going to paint around those, so just keep it nice and simple. Darker here, lighter in the background. So I think that is drying quite nicely. It doesn't matter if it's still a little bit damp, because that will give us a bit of a soft edge, which might help with the actual softness of that top edge there. Actually, I do need to bring this sky down just a little bit. Just that bit there. A bit of a dip there. Okay, right, buildings. They're warm in colour. And I think my light red, bit of burnt sienna, bit of yellow ochre. I can cool it down with some cobalt blue as I go through, but essentially those are the main colours there. So this light red could even add a bit of cadmium orange there, just go really vivid in the colour for these near buildings. Now I'm going to start at the top there, and they are quite dark, so a little bit of ultramarine blue in there, cad red, and get a good edge to my brush now for doing these buildings. Maybe a little flat brush might be another brush you could use for doing these. Light red, bit of burnt sienna. Keep altering the colours and values as we go over the scene. It doesn't matter if you do leave out little bits of the paper unpainted. They could be little architectural details. Okay, let's go a little bit lighter now for the top of the buildings below. Bit of yellow ochre. Keep the verticals vertical. As I come down to the base of this building, this nearby building, go a bit darker, ultramarine blue, a little bit of neutral tint, tiny bit of neutral tint, just to go a little bit darker. Not too dark. So I'm now just following that line of the top edge of those boats. Let's continue on. Unfortunately, where this paint dried, I'm going to get a little bit of a hard edge. Doesn't matter. Okay, as I'm going over to the back now, I'm going to go lighter. And a little bit cooler. Let's add a bit of cobalt to that. Follow that top edge of boats. Burnt sienna, a little bit of cobalt blue. And then over to the right, it does get a little bit lighter there, this sort of stonework. How can I get that stonework? I'm using a little bit of cobalt green, a bit of burnt sienna. But again, not too dark. Up to that right hand side. And then down to these boats in the corner of the marina there. Around that figure, let's have something light for the quayside, bit of yellow ochre, follow that line there. Okay, well that's rather nice, that effect there. All right, so recap, we've done the sky, we've got the background buildings in. Okay, I might need to darken up some of these background buildings just on that side there with a flat brush when that's dry. Now let me do the water in between the middle boats and the jetty, and then the jetty to the foreground. Are there any questions at all? Right, water. Bit of a watery mix. Ultramarine blue, bit of cobalt green and a little bit of burnt sienna, ultramarine blue, and just some negative painting around these shapes where I did my cross hatching. There we are, that's one side. And then down this side. Up to that jetty. Down to the near side now. And I'm going to go a bit greener on this side. Paint around those boats, paint around the buoys. So I'm painting around these buoys and their reflections. And then go a little bit darker in that bottom left corner. Quite easy, these buoys, being a sort of conical triangular shape. Right, a little bit darker in this bottom left corner. And then over to the quay side. There we go. Right. Sea done. I will go over, if you notice in the photograph, the sea has this subtle, slightly darker layer to it, darker reflection. So it's a little bit lighter there, a bit darker here. So I'll wait till that dries before going in with that kind of shape. Do you see these sort of oval shapes giving us the feeling of the movement of the water? So that will be done when that's dry. I will now put in a few of the dark areas of the buildings behind with a flat brush. And not too dark, all right, but just in a few areas where it is, these buildings are a little bit darker. Again, think about those geometric shapes. There we go. All right, the middle ground boats now. I'm going to use a synthetic brush for this. Now, trying to create the impression of the complexity of all of those boats, I'm just going to try and pick out some major shapes to define some of the lighter areas. For example, the back of that boat there, look at the shape of that back there. There, another one there, another one there, that one there. So just painting like a lighter grey around that area to define that shape. And then after that, some darker shapes where these sails are wrapped around bits of the mast, and darker canopies, the waterline, things like that, just to, not too much. There's going to be a careful balance here of how much detail you put in. So I'm just picking out some this is my mid-grey value. Just pick out some lighter greys. There's a sort of window here of a boat. Some of these greys are a little bit warmer, so I'll pick up some of this mix down here. So warmer grey, cooler grey. And just for my brush marks now, I'm creating the impression of the tops of the furthest boats. And then on the right hand side there seems to be some bigger yachts over there. In places there's a lot of blue that could be coverings or shelter. Coming closer now to the water's edge and trying to define some of those boats, the backs of the boats, for example, here. Another one there. Nearly there. Sorry, this is rather laborious part of the painting, and to watch. Not too much commentary for me, just trying to concentrate on getting these shapes right. Let's go a bit darker now with some of the darker, it's too dark, a little bit of ultramarine blue, a little bit of neutral tint, just a tiny bit of this in places. Again, I'm trying to find little shapes and not go too dark. There's two boats then, there's a boat here. I need to try and define those a little bit more. Okay. A few details for the buildings now. Windows. Just a few of them. Important windows nearest to us. Don't go too dark with these windows either. Minute details for the buildings on the right and the background, just to give the indication of what's going on there. All right, boats in the foreground now. I will go back to my bigger mop brush. Let me just see if there's any questions. Question from Betty. Did you say cobalt green and burnt sienna not to darken too much? Yes. Yeah, don't darken that too much. I think that was for the sea, wasn't it? Okay. Thanks very much. And a question from Mike. Why synthetic brush versus hair point load? Yes, the synthetic brush allows me to, it's a harder brush, it's a stiffer brush, so I can do detail work a little bit easier. The mop brush is softer, great for holding a lot of paint, great for adding in layers as well, because it's not going to destroy the layer below. So you just get used to natural hair, or soft brush or hard brush, depending on what you're doing there, Mike. Thanks very much. All right, I think that answers all those questions. Right, nearby boats. Plan here is do the shadier parts of the boats and the hull, and then their reflections on those three, starting with the left-hand one. And something appropriately shady. There we are. And then the reflection, let's use a cobalt green, a little bit of neutral tint, not too much, bit of viridian green. And well, let's just add in a bit of reflection for that jetty beyond the boat. So I'm using the point of my mop brush to get in those reflection shapes. Paint around that little boy there, and then up to that middle bit of the jetty, reflection. And now middle boat, same process. Shadow on this side of the cabin. Paint around those fenders. The hull is a little bit darker. Check the edge on my brush. It's actually quite dark, this one, especially just there, where it's not getting too much light. And then that reflection, cobalt green, bit of viridian green, something dark, not black. Leave a bit of reflection for the fenders. And then that middle bit of jetty again. Last boat. Shadow on that side, maybe a little bit on that side of the hull. And then shady on the right hand side. There we go. This water is dry now. I'm going to just glaze over it with a bit of this sort of darker reflection here and a bit of this cobalt green, viridian green. Make sure it's well and truly mixed. And just do a little bit of observation of the photo to get that kind of shape right. Find the mop brush is the best brush for this. Remember to go over the edges. Right, bit of detail on these boats. Small mop brush. Where's my little... Choose another small synthetic brush. And let's get some markings up the tops of the boats. And then this one. And this one here. Windows on the cabins. Middle one's got 3. This right hand one has got 2 kind of, they're funny sort of rounded windows. And then rounded one on the right hand side. water's edge. Dark line generally makes them look a little bit more authentic. Got the walkway going down the right hand side here. And top rail. Figure. Not too dark. And then shadow. Just tidy up the group of boats. In the distance on that right hand side. And then the reflections of these buoys in the water. So the reflections are going to be a bit lighter, sorry, a bit darker than the objects they are reflecting. I've got some pencil lines showing here. I'm going to remove those, and in these boats, just to give a crisper, cleaner edge. I might glaze over this jetty a bit. There we are. You can see we're getting back that crisper edge. Nearly at the mast stage. A water's edge for these buoys, and yeah, I think I'll just glaze over the jetty a bit. Too bright. A weak yellow ochre, I reckon. Let's mix something up here. Right, mast time. Let's start with some lighter masks first and then get darker. I'm using a rigger brush for the masks, and for the lighter masks I'll use some white gouache paint fresh out the tube. Now I was asked a question about this on Patreon about getting the consistency right. You don't want the paint too wet, otherwise it goes sort of milky and you just get like a sort of greyish glazed line. You don't want it too dry and you have that sort of dry brush mark that invariably runs out of steam before its destination. Now, I didn't draw in the mask. I just think those pencil lines would show. And I'm using the edge of my paper as a guide to get that kind of, get them parallel. A white mask against a dark background would be good. A bit more water. You see that one was dry, a bit too dry, that one. Let's try it again. Keep mixing. Let's have this next one. They're still a bit too dry. Yeah, so go a little bit slower. That will get the desired effect. So a few more lighter masks, then we'll go a bit darker. While I've got the white paint, I can do a few little ropes. There. And then just a few horizontals. Just where I see some light. Okay, let's go a bit darker now. A mid-brown, do some brown masks. Brown masks. Burnt sienna, bit of yellow ochre. mixed it to get the right consistency. So not too thick, not too thin. Just the right amount of moisture on the brush. You don't want it too much, otherwise you put brush to paper and it all suddenly comes out. Right, thinking about the depth again and the nearby mask a bit higher. All right, and now for some darker masks and burnt umber, a little bit of neutral tint, not too dark. Check my brush, perhaps one over here. Perhaps a bit of rigging just coming out at an angle on some of these will just give a bit more interest. Few lines for our harbour side perspective. Perhaps a little bit of shadow around, a little bit of shading around some of these boys here. Think about that light coming from that left-hand side. about that top bit. I think I'm nearly done. We're getting there. This jetty in might need to have a bit of shading because of the walkway above it. Let's get a bit of glazed shadow over there. There we are. And perhaps a reflection underneath as well. It's better. I might do a little bit of reflection for some of these lighter boats, pick up some white gouache. This is some old stuff in that bottom right corner of my palette. Not too bright. And let's pick up a few of these boats. All right. Also, a little final touch. Look at these reflections of some of those masts. Look how wiggly they are. So let's get in a few of those and then we're done. There we are. I think I'm done. Know when to stop when the going's good. All right. Let's just see if there's any more questions. So a question from Mike. That little silver red among that little sliver red among the boats maybe. What a brilliant idea. Thanks, Mike. Little slither of red. There. There. Yeah. Fantastic idea. Bit of warm with the cool, eh? Cadmium red. Let's just put that right of center. And then you always get lots of blues and reds, don't you, in harbours? There we are. Thanks very much, Mike. Brilliant idea. There we go. Might even be a little focal point. All right, well, thanks very much for those of you still on here live. Thanks for watching. Catch up with you on the next